rush go supermarket line. Trolley full of candles, sardine and lime. The youth them patch roof, the man them clean drain.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Wherever you are, I want to say welcome to the learning journey. And we're going to dive into, of course, the history of hurricanes in Jamaica for the last 400 years. Sit around as we explore, and this is all about learning. Remember to subscribe, of course. When a storm hits Jamaica, it's not just nature. It's history, economy, people, and politics. This island, Jamaica, lies strategically in the path of Atlantic tropical cyclones. For over 4 centuries, hurricanes have battered its shores. And in doing so, they have left deep footprints on its society, economy, and governance. Today, we embark on a learning journey. From the 17th century plantation era through mid-20th century infrastructural shocks to the 21st century fiscal trap, Jamaica's story of storms is the story of vulnerability evolving and resilience being forced into being. First, a quick orientation. Jamaica sits in the northern Caribbean Sea, just south of the trade wind belt, and within reach of Atlantic tropical cyclones that run westwards from Africa and via the Atlantic into the Caribbean. That location means exposure. Hurricanes that form across the Atlantic or systems moving through the Caribbean Sea often clip or cross the island. According to one assessment, Jamaica recorded 10 strong cyclones between 1722 and 1850. The hazard environment includes wind, storm surge, heavy rainfall, flash flooding, and landslides. And the human geography matters: coastal settlements, plantations, ports, tourist resorts, all elements that concentrate people and assets in hazard-vulnerable places. In short, hazard plus human systems ensures vulnerability, and over time those vulnerabilities change. Our first major epoch, the colonial era, from roughly 1600 to 1899. The earliest formally recorded hurricane in Jamaica dates back to 1559, when a hurricane caused severe damage to the island's infrastructure. In the 17th century, the records become patchy, but still show repeated storms. For example, the island's archives record a storm in 1683 that sank many ships, and in 1690, widespread destruction. In this era, vulnerability was deeply rooted in the plantation economy and the institution of slavery. The colonial lens measured storms in terms of crop damage, sugar, slaves, shipping, more than humanitarian losses. The people most vulnerable were the enslaved, the landless, the coastal workers. One historian notes, African slaves comprised the poorest and most vulnerable members of these plantation societies. Hurricanes routinely killed hundreds and sometimes thousands of slaves. In other words, hazard existed, but the human system magnified its impact. The 18th century brings a dramatic sequence of events. On 28 August 1722, a hurricane's eye passed over Port Royal. The sea rose some 16 feet above normal. Most of Kingston's buildings were damaged or destroyed. Plantations were wrecked. Ships were lost. Then, the 1780s, 5 severe storms in 7 years hitting Jamaica, including the event on 3rd October 1780 that destroyed Savannah Lamar. The result? Mass population stress. The territories lost their crops, food supplies became scarce, and disease broke out. One colonial report estimated that at least 15,000 enslaved persons died in the aftermath of successive storms, not only from wind and waves, but also from famine and disease. What this shows is that in the pre-modern era, vulnerability was structural. Lack of provisioning, reliance on export crops, and colonial trade restrictions meant that when a storm hit, recovery was weak. Moving into the 19th century, at least 21 recorded tropical cyclones affected Jamaica. For example, a major hurricane on 18th October 1815 flooded large parts of the island. Importantly, this is when formal monitoring began. The Jamaica Weather Service was established in Kingston in 1880, issuing warnings for the first time. At the same time, ecological vulnerability deepened. Widespread deforestation for sugar plantations removed natural buffers. Soil erosion increased. Hillsides became unstable. The land became more vulnerable to heavy rain and landslides. The 20th century ushers in changing patterns of vulnerability. It's no longer just mortality or plantation collapse. It's infrastructure, economy, urban centers. For instance, a hurricane in September 1915 cut telecommunications between Kingston and other districts. And in August 1944, a major hurricane crossed from Boston Bay to Montego Bay, hitting the northern half of Jamaica. The nature of damage changed: heavy rainfall, flooding, landslides, long-term infrastructure failure, not just wind or surge. For example, in 1950, a slow-moving system caused extremely heavy rainfall, highlighting that rainfall geohydrohazard is as important as wind. Here, the island's growing economy, roads, power lines, housing estates, became exposed. A pivotal moment came on 18th of August 1951, when Hurricane Charlie made landfall in Jamaica as a high-end Category 3 storm. It caused more than 150 deaths and extensive damage, the deadliest natural disaster for Jamaica in the 20th century up to that point. The socio-economic fallout was stark. Banana, coconut, and citrus crops decimated. Major housing damage. Landslides and freshwater supply cut. Disease risk rose. In its aftermath, the government formed the Hurricane Housing Organization, HHO, a state body dedicated to structural resilience and housing reconstruction. This marked the first explicit national institutional effort to address hazard vulnerability. In other words, the shift from reactive recovery to proactive institutional response. From 1952 to 1987, Jamaica did not experience a major direct hurricane landfall for some 37 years, a lull which fostered both strengthened institutions and some complacency. After devastating floods in western Jamaica in June 1979, the government recognized the need for a permanent national disaster management organization. This led to the creation of Office of Disaster Preparedness, ODP. But during this lull, building standards enforcement remained weak, informal settlements expanded, and infrastructural maintenance lagged. The stage was set for a shock. On 12th of September 1988, Hurricane Gilbert made direct landfall in Jamaica, first on the east coast around 10 a.m., the eye about 15 miles across. Rainfall and surge were massive. The storm remains one of the most damaging in Jamaican history. The scale of destruction was systemic. Housing roofs torn off, power lines downed, agriculture devastated. Let's look at the sectors. Housing. Reports show that up to 80% of homes lost their roofs. Over 100,000 houses were either destroyed or damaged. Infrastructure. Electricity supply cut by half. Thousands of wood poles needed replacement. But what's critical is the structural story. Many state-financed housing projects collapsed massively. The failure wasn't just nature, it was governance. The lesson: by the late 20th century, vulnerability was about institutional capacity, enforcement, urban planning, not just hazard. Gilbert was the catalyst. In its aftermath, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management, ODPEM, was significantly strengthened. Disaster Preparedness Office. A national zonal program was introduced so that communities will be able to function for the first 72 hours without external assistance. Housing and building codes were revisited. Community-based drills and early warning systems expanded. The shift from recovery to preparedness, from ad hoc to systemic. We now enter the contemporary era. The primary metric of vulnerability has shifted again, from mortality to infrastructure shock to fiscal and systemic exposure. For example, Hurricane Ivan, 2004, major damage, approximately $580 million US, your text figure. Hurricane Dean, 2007, approximately $329 million US in damage. Hurricane Beryl 2024. Approximately $67 million damage, equal to approximately 1.1% of Jamaica's GDP. These events stress public finances, insurance systems, recovery mechanisms. The cost of doing business in a hurricane-prone island is escalating. One of the most insidious effects is fiscal. Recurrent storms drive up public debt. One study suggests that the 10 worst storms caused an average 10% increase in public debt relative to trend. And 3 years later, the debt remains approximately 18% higher. What this means: every dollar spent on recovery is a dollar not spent on adaptation, education, infrastructure, long-term resilience. The island finds itself in a debt-climate feedback loop. For small island developing states like Jamaica with limited fiscal space and high external debt, this is a major constraint. Let's focus on the economy. Tourism contributes nearly 20% of Jamaica's GDP. This sector is hugely vulnerable. A storm can shutter resorts, damage coastlines, reduce arrivals. Agriculture, while less dominant than it once was, is still exposed. Bananas, coffee, citrus, and all those vulnerable to wind, rainfall, flooding, salt intrusion. Coastal infrastructure, ports and airports often sit on low-lying wetlands, vulnerable to surge and flooding. All of which means the economy is now intimately tied to hazard exposure. The stakes are high. The human dimension. Roughly 20% of Jamaicans live in informal settlements, often on steep hillsides, flood-prone valleys, or gullies. These communities lack formal building code compliance, drainage, waste management. They are at the front line of hazard. Storms also accelerate migration. Internationally, major Caribbean storms are associated with approximately 6% increase in migration rate from home country. Jamaica is no exception. Thus, storms are not just natural disasters. They reshape societies, settlements, movements of people. In response to all of this, Jamaica has built an architecture of resilience, institutional evolution, from the early colonial neglect to post-1950s housing bodies. Let's step back and synthesize. Over 4 centuries, Jamaica's vulnerability has shifted through 3 trajectories. What does this mean for the future of Jamaica and for any society facing climate hazard? Enforce building codes. Move from policy to legislation and rigorous compliance. Invest in nature-based defense. Protect ecosystems which reduce flood and surge impact cost-effectively. Strengthen fiscal resilience. The DRF architecture must remain robust to buffer shocks. Address social urban vulnerability. Upgrade informal settlements. Improve drainage, early warnings, and community capacity. Lastly, awareness. Storms will continue. Jamaica's story shows us how vulnerability evolves and how much depends on the human response, not just the meteorology. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey valuable, please like, share, and subscribe for more on hazard, society, and resilience.
Miss Ivy rush go supermarket line. Charlie full of candle, sardine and lime. The youth them patch roof, the man them clean drain. Shelter them open, Red Cross on the lane. Politician pan mic says stay inside. Truck roll, siren in the night.
Flashlight check, battery charge. Jamaica small, but we heart large. Storms come, we ready, we strong. We steady, we build up, we own. Tied down, we get together, we pray together, we wait.
First breeze lick, zinc sheets start singing. Grandma rub oil lamp, lights start dim. Neighbor show come over me yard more safe. We share little food, we share one faith.
Rain beat roof, but we not lose some. We ancestors watch them guide we strong. From Charlie to Gilbert to burial again. 400 years of storm and pain. But every time the wind passed through, Jamaica rise up brand new. Storms come, we ready, we strong. We steady, we cry, we pray, but we never fall. We island spirits stronger than all.
We're ready not just for the storm, but for life after.